It's going to be an interesting day. I forgot the announcement for the daddy-daughter dance that came up. My name's John. I have 3 daughters, 9, 7, and 5. I've taken my first 2 to dances already before, but this is our 3rd one. Ellie's pretty excited about it, and I'm already crying. This is going to be awesome, huh? Yeah, that threw me. Okay, I shouldn't have watched that announcement. All right. My name's John. Really glad you guys are here with us today in person, watching online, or in the future. Just glad you guys are here with us today. Man, and part of it was the daddy-daughter dance. The other part was just thank you to this team for leading us this morning in worship of our King. Thank you to Kevin and his passion for the mission of serving our world. For Ed leading us the way he did, and man, thank you for leading us in that prayer. Thank you to those who greet us at the front doors. Thank you to those who make these lines straight in these chairs, who cleans the rooms, who cleans this building, who is investing in our students up in the warehouse, who is pouring into our kids in the kids' hallway, to my wife who's hugging on babies right now and getting her fix. To the guys who are doing the tech stuff that I'm banished from ever touching. Thank you. Thank you to the team that, I don't know if you know it or not, but in the morning crowds into this room off to my right and prays for you and for me, for this church, and for Beaver Creek, and for the cities that we call home. Thank you. I wasn't planning on starting it this way. I wasn't planning on starting to cry. But this has been our conversation, right? Following the servant. It's not follow the leader. Follow how I do this. No, you can learn how everyone can serve you as you go along. How you can control underlings. No, it's a servant who's blazing a path. And yet this servant is the creator of everything. The Almighty King, who in chapter 10 of Mark says, I didn't come to be served. Though he is the one who is worthy, right? To be served. To be worshiped. And he says, no, I came as my own creation to serve and to give my life a ransom. And this path that we're trying to follow the servant on is not one that we see throughout our weeks usually, right? Throughout our days. This is a different kind of path. This is the path, again, that flips everything on end. It's the upside-down kingdom. It's the 180 mindset. It's the flipped lifestyle. It's the pattern that we don't see anywhere else besides following Jesus. And when I think about this path, I think about shoes. I think about the shoes that I put on every day, except for those really lazy days. The shoes that I slip on, that I lace on, that take me in my day, step by step throughout my day. And then I begin to wonder, those shoes, are they stepping on his footprints, on his steps, on his way, on his path? In our conversation, in our journey through Mark, as we're looking at following the servant, we're to chapters 11, 12, and 13. And I know what you're thinking, some of you. They gave him 3 chapters. We're going to be here all day. I assure you we're not. It'll be at least 2. Okay. That was nervous laughter. That was not funny laughter. That was very nervous laughter. I get it. No, but there's so much in these 3 chapters, but we're just going to look at a layer that is littered throughout these 3 chapters of Mark 11, 12, and 13, is the servant as a teacher. Now, what I want you to do when I say the word teacher, I know you immediately flood to pop quiz. You're like the giant red F on the top of the test. Or you think whiteboards, throw the whiteboards out. You think smart boards, throw the smart boards out. You think chalkboards, well, they're not there anymore. Throw those out. Felt boards, that was Sunday school 50 years ago. You throw out the syllabus, throw out the desks, throw out the classroom setting. Now, when I say teacher, I'm not meaning in this way. If you need to, think influencer. Think steward who's passing the baton. It is one who is helping those acquire knowledge, competencies, or shaping value in their values. And Mark 11 through 13 is jam full of Jesus blazing the path for us to follow. Blazing the path of how we can negotiate and navigate difficult conversations. How to set priorities. And how to begin to set in our minds a servant-teacher mentality. But to get there, I want to just I'm going to zoom way out and try to give a quick just overview of these 3 chapters. We open up on chapter 11, and if you'd like, you have your Bibles. If you want to follow along, I'm not reading it to you. There's 3 chapters. That will take us 2 days, 3 days to be in here. But if you want to leaf through, if you have your app, if you want to do that, feel free. If you want to just sit back, that's okay as well. In chapter 11, we see Jesus instructing his disciples that morning with very specific instructions to go find a colt, told them where to find it. They gave pushback, like, what about, should we do this or not? He gave them instruction on what to say if anybody gave pushback. They did it. They came back. He gets up on this and starts to head into Jerusalem. Without getting into it, this is starting to check off a number of prophecies that are happening here in these next few chapters. He enters into Jerusalem, and this is where we get the Palm Sunday, the branches on the ground, people hollering. Now, this is Jerusalem. This is the capital. This is Passover weekend. We're well over 1 million people in town. So it's not 1 million people lining the pathway. Okay, this is just one entrance into town. So this isn't like, let's shut everything down today because today is Palm Sunday because it never existed before. Okay, but there's a crowd of people that are anticipating that the Messiah is going to bring something that lines up with their expectations. They're sorely going to be disappointed, but they are shouting, Hosanna, yeah, the King of David, this is the expected one, woohoo! And he comes walking in on the colt. He comes into town, and this is how quick Mark likes to just keep going with stuff. He says Jesus pokes his head into the temple. He says he looks all around. Different versions really emphasize that. He looks all around, and then he says, it's late. We're going back. And so they go back to Bethany. That's it. He comes into town. And for Mark, that's all he lays out for us. That he looks around the temple. And he says, it's late. Let's go back. Let's go back to Bethany, 2 miles back to Bethany, to the temporary current headquarters. The next morning they wake up and it says Jesus is hungry. Yes, creator of the universe. Yes, almighty king. Yes, who also came as a human. He was hungry. He saw a fig tree. He's 33. He is very familiar with fig trees. Fully leaved, goes up to it, no fruit, curses it. Curious? They go back to Jerusalem. They go into Jerusalem. They go into the temple. Oh yeah, flipping tables, flipping benches, driving some people out, keeping people from using the temple as a shortcut, and teaching. He's a multitasker. And teaches. And then they go back to Bethany. 2-mile hike back to Bethany that night. The morning they wake up, they start to head towards Jerusalem again. One of his disciples, Peter, sees the fig tree. Hey, teacher, it's dead. And Jesus begins to spell out something that doesn't even refer to the tree, but begins to give them pillars of what life is going to look like a little bit, of a life in faith and what that looks like to have a life of faith. He begins to show the symbiotic relationship between prayer, the power of prayer, and the power of forgiveness. Goes into the city, again, Jerusalem, goes into the temple where they still might be doing some cleanup. And then they must have been up all night, huddling together, breaking up into teams, doing some group work. But the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, and anybody else that you want to think of had grouped up, and they were coming up with a plan. And as soon as he walked in, boom, they were hitting him with plan A, authority. Plan B, taxes. Plan C, resurrection. And then this one seems a little less planned. What's the greatest commandment? And then you get the curious phrase, and they stopped asking questions. And so then Jesus puts a puzzle on them and begins to question some of the teaching and expectations of the Messiah. Remember what had just happened 2 days ago when he came on the colt, walking into town, and they're screaming all these things. Sorry, I have a cough drop in my mouth. I apologize. And he asks them, what's your expectations and thoughts on the Messiah? And he leaves them with a question. And at some point, he's sitting back. All of a sudden, we find Jesus, like Mark likes to do that. All of a sudden, like warp speed to another part. And he's sitting there. And Jesus is sitting on a bench. But he's in the temple. But he's viewing. And he's just sitting there hanging out. And his disciples aren't around him because we hear later, he huddles them up. But he's sitting there and he's just watching people give of their tithes and their offerings into these receptacles that kind of look like trumpets almost that are sitting there, and they're dropping stuff in, and all of a sudden he huddles this. I don't know how long he was sitting there watching lots of people give. Some people probably going, oh man, this is a lot, like whatever they're, kind of show they're putting on. But at some point, bing, bing, 2 little coins drop in, and he brings his team over and goes, guys, come here. And they start to have a conversation about what just happened. At some point, they're leaving the temple. And one of the disciples goes, man, this place is amazing. Look how big this is. They're in Capitol. Some of these guys had never been there before. They never really fully experienced it. Like, this is amazing architecture. And then Jesus, in a prophetic moment, goes, yeah, it's all going to come down here soon. And then we warp speed again to just a few moments later, and Jesus, just a few of disciples up on the Mount of Olives, which is facing the temple. You can see the temple from where they are. And he begins to have a conversation with them. And a lot of people look at this, and they're like, oh man, I want to know the mysteries of the future in chapter 13. And so they start to really parse this, and I think they miss Jesus' main vein, which is an imperative posture. Because in just verses 5 to the end of the chapter of 13, there's some people count up to 19 imperatives. Watch out, be aware, be on the edge of your seat. There's a posture of readiness. There's a mentality of preparedness. There's a posture that they take. Now that was a lot. There's also a lot in 3 chapters. But I want to give an overview of the fact that he, in every one of these settings, is a teacher. Is one who helps pass along and shape knowledge, competencies, and values. If it helps some of us, an influencer. This is what we see in these 3 chapters. You may say, John, you don't know me, or you don't know me well enough because I am not a teacher and I'm not an influencer. I am an introvert who does not want to be around people. I do not want to be around people. Or you may just be like, I don't have that group of people around me. You do. You impact and influence others. Home, work, the gym, whatever groups you're a part of, friends, family. And that's where I need us to start, is to say, I am a teacher. I do influence people. You need to say that and own it, because that's part of your mission, is to go and tell, go and make. So even if you're struggling with that, or if you've accepted, that is, I'm called to be a teacher and influencer. To answer the question, how can I follow the servant each day, putting on my shoes? How do I follow the servant's path as a teacher so that I can help shape and pass along the truth and Jesus' love to others? And we begin to answer that question right in the middle of chapter 12. You have to come with me on a time machine real quick, because I had an opportunity to be up here having a conversation with you guys a while back on chapter 3. We had some chairs up here of a tender heart and hard heart, and we had a man in the middle with a withered hand. We had Jesus, and we had those who had set up a trap. And at the end of chapter 3, after Jesus had left them speechless and not be able to answer his question because they knew either way he had flipped the trap on them, they left and they teamed up. The Pharisees teamed up and sought out the Herodians. And that's what we're here, is the Pharisees and the Herodians. Now, the only way in our context that I can really think about this, there are maybe some sports teams that are, not so friendly to each other. But if we go far right politically, far left politically, and where neither two shall meet, these two found a common purpose, a common mission, to destroy this upriser. And so they come to Jesus, which should already lend him to be a little suspicious. They tried to catch him in his words, and they came to him and they said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." They're not a brown-nosing because they're not really trying to gain any favor from him. So I tried to find a term, and I know sycophant would work, but I really like this word, foplement. A fake compliment. They're trying to butter him up, to set him up. Puff up his head a little bit, puff up his chest a little bit, get him ready, and like, oh, wow, yeah, and all of a sudden drop the bomb on him. But within this foplement, as much as a lot of this is true, he's a man of integrity. He is not swayed by others' power, influence, standing. They're wrong because he does pay attention to who they are. And that's what we learn about our investment in other people, our teaching them and the time we spend on them, because this is our first clue into how Jesus reacts and interacts with his audience. Because he really does pay attention to who they are. He really does learn about them, and he wants to know them. And if we're standing on the path, our shoes laced and ready to follow the teacher-servant, the servant teacher, what steps do we take? There are 2 steps that I want us to think about today that I think we see throughout these 3 chapters. The first is know them. Don't make assumptions on who your audience is or who's around you at work, where your kids might be on their journey. Don't make the assumption. Jump into their story and know their story. With Jesus, not every conversation and interaction is equal. That might be hard to swallow because we're like, Jesus says love your enemies. Yes, love them. He did not spend all the time with them. Now, when I say enemies, I'm not saying those who are not just following after him. I'm meaning those who are hostile. Dr. Henry Cloud, clinical psychologist, author of a lot of books, wrote a book called Necessary Endings. And in this book, it's fascinating how he breaks it down. And I'm going to give you the most minimal cliff notes possible. But he says there's the wise people, there's the foolish people, and there's the evil people. And he goes, the wise people receive feedback, receive constructive criticism, instruction, and they adjust. And with their hearts, they're grateful. They're not perfect, but they receive that from others. The foolish people receive feedback, criticism, but they do not adjust. And oftentimes in their hearts, there becomes distance, resentment. But the evil people want to do harm. If anybody gives them any type of that instruction, there is intent to hurt. And within that book, without spelling it, he says, hey, there's safe places to be, and there's places you need to keep distance to some extent, or at least guard your heart. And we see this in these 3 chapters in Jesus' conversation. We see with these enemies, these Pharisees, these Sadducees, these Herodians, when they come to him with all their tricks, traps, he's pretty quick to answer. Often, if not every time, with a question that their only response is, we don't know, silence, amazed, let's arrest him, or we're done asking questions. But then there's a group of people that we see in these 3 chapters, or at least a person. And this is where I think that God was the greatest, the commandment does not necessarily seem like, because he starts to respond going like, wow, I see you answered all these really well. This doesn't seem to be as much of the trap. And you also see Jesus' response to this Pharisee differently. He goes, wow, what do you think about the greatest commandment? And then there begins to become a dialogue. Jesus does not just give a quick answer. He does not just, now again, he never ignores any of them. He doesn't just shut the door on them. He still answers them, but he answers them in a way that really puts them back and makes them think, wow. Like either traps them in their own trap or just kind of keeps them at bay. But with this Pharisee who asked this question, there's a different response. And Jesus gives encouragement. He gives challenge. Because I think he sees in this heart something different than the intentions of some of the others. But how can he get to this point? Because he knows him. Now again, we're following the servant teacher who also happens to be God. So I don't know how instantly he knew the guy. I don't know how that played out. I'm not saying that we just instantly make judgment assumptions. But then there's a group who are in this believing or wanting and a desire to step into more belief. His disciples, his followers. We see at the foot of the dead fig tree on the way to Jerusalem a conversation that's different. We see in the end of chapter 12, after the ding ding of the 2 coins from the woman who gave everything she had, a different conversation. We see in chapter 13, when he's just surrounded by just a few of his followers, a very different conversation. Both in depth, in length of time, in desire for understanding and clarity and revelation, and exposition. So you have these, the desire to step into belief. You have these that are a person who seems to be seeking or at a different stage than the other 2. And then you have this group, this hostile group. I'm a very visual learner. And so for me, I did forget to mention the group. Those who make the coffee, thank you. Okay. All right. Give me one moment and enjoy your work. In Matthew 23, Jesus is interacting with the hostiles. And he uses some very interesting and vivid metaphors, analogies to line up who they are. And for me, one that sticks out is the fact that he goes, you guys are a clean cup on the outside. Now, I promise you, first of all, anyone who partook in the coffee today, all the cups have been cleaned, okay? Everything's been cleaned. Don't freak out. But imagine you're getting that cup of coffee and you're starting to pump that coffee in, and all of a sudden, you just, eyes are still like barely open. I know, I'm right there with you. And all of a sudden, you open your eyes enough to see the coffee going in, and you see that's the inside. And in Matthew, Jesus uses that and says, hey guys, that's you. To the hostiles. Worry about cleaning the inside. Worry about what's going on in the interior life. You're making this all look nice and shiny. All that to say is that to influence and to lead others, we need to know who they are. Not to label them, but we're seeing Jesus map out. Yes, you love everyone. You love them all. But he seems pretty clear, even in these 3 chapters, that his depth and time of response and his depth of clarity and revelation starts and begins there. Now again, when I say the hostiles, he also doesn't leave them hanging. You'll see throughout all these verses and these chapters, in just 3 chapters, he asks such relevant questions because he knows who they are. The Sadducees is a group of people. This is the first time Mark mentions them. He's almost done with his book, and he just mentions them here. And the Sadducees were a group that believed that, now I'm going to use a fancy word just to show off, Pentateuch. What that just simply means is the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy were the only true scripture. And because of that, they didn't see anywhere in those first 5 books the mention of Revelation. Nope. Resurrection. And so when they ask this question in that section in 12 about the resurrection, Mark is very specific to say, because he wants his audience to know, hey, this group does not believe in the resurrection, any type of resurrection. Which, I wonder how that felt for Jesus as he's having this conversation. But Jesus knew who they were. He knew them. And his response, they're the only group to not really respond back with any verbal response. And it's because he dismantled their foundation by using a portion of one of the first 5 books to say God is the God of the living. And yet all these people that are mentioned are dead. Can they still be dead, or are they with him now? And the way he answers is just brilliant. Sorry, I'm nerding out for a second. I apologize. I want to keep us moving for this simple fact that we get to know them. Again, to geek out real fast. To know them. I love how he does this. You look it through. And here's what I want us to make sure that we spend some time this week, if you're willing to take on the challenge of looking at 11 and 12 and 13 and just sitting in that space. Because Jesus does something throughout this where he uses object lessons, and I call them sticky mnemonics, just for the simple fact that he's soon to be gone, and he's hoping that this, they're going to see a fig tree again. And it wasn't that he was mad at the fig tree, because he was not controlled by his emotions, but he was showing them what's about to just happen in the temple when he's flipping tables. He's not cleansing the temple. He's not fixing the temple. He's saying this is no longer, he's disqualifying the temple. And that's when he starts to respond to the fig tree and say, look, it's dead. It looks like it's alive. It looks like it's good. You remember how the guy said, oh, look at this structure. This is amazing. He goes, no. Again, it's not about the outside, it's about the inside. And so they sit around this dead fig tree, and he begins to talk to them about their internal faith. That the temple's going to look a lot different now because the Spirit resides in us. It had nothing to do whether or not the fig tree had fruit and he was hungry and he was mad at it. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with, the outside looked all good, it looked appealing, but when you went up, there was no life, there was no fruit. He didn't explain it. He just walked away from the tree, cursed it, flipped the temple, taught in the temple, came back. That night they slept. They got up the next day, saw the tree was dead, and then he taught them. He had a lot of patience. But it begins with you have to know who's around you. But there's another side of the coin that they need to know you, and you see throughout. Even the foplement. Again, I love that word. I'm sure it's not real, but I found it somewhere. The fake compliment said he was a man of integrity. He wasn't swayed by people's power. They knew him. And because of that, and his answer even to his authority, they had no answer. So as much as we need to get to know others that are surrounding in our lives so that we can have an influence in theirs, so that we can pass along truth to whatever depth and time we discern. There's also a side of they need to know us. His flipping the tables had nothing to do with was he angry and was he sad and was he broken for what they had turned this into? Yes. And throughout the questions that he received, he always stayed focused on the priorities. Even the fig tree, when they asked him about it, he didn't say one thing. If you look at his answer after the fig tree, he didn't talk about the tree once. Because he wants to keep the main thing the main thing. I'm going to ask the band to come up. Because I can't wait for them to lead us out. But my hope I gotta pick the heaviest pair. That what begins the path to follow the servant teacher, to begin to follow the steps of the servant teacher, is to first be willing to choose humility and not just to make assumptions about people. Oh, you have this slant, or you have this perspective, or you're kind of this personality. But to choose to step into humility and to step into their story and to know them. Because if you don't know them, how are you going to ask relevant questions? If you don't know them, are you following the pattern that Jesus gave them? Maybe they're a hostile and you're spending all your time in that space. But then also, are you willing to walk faithfully after the servant, so that your life pattern, as they see who you are, they see integrity, not perfection. If you start to give off perfection, you're cleaning the outside of the cup a little too much. But are you willing to be real? When you lace up your shoes every day, when you go out that door, that no matter what direction you have to go in, it's still the path of following the servant. That's an individual conversation, but it's also a conversation with you and God. Let me pray. Jesus, thank you for being the way, for showing us who you are. For giving us clear instructions so that we're not just flailing or guessing, but that we can keep our eyes fixed on what you have laid out for us. Jesus, I just pray for me and each person here praying on themselves, Lord, as we offer ourselves as teachers, as influencers, as those who help others gain knowledge of your truth, knowledge of your love. Lord, that it's to your glory, it's pointing to you and not to us. Jesus, I just pray as I put my shoes on tomorrow, that I choose to follow the steps of the servant teacher. Jesus, we love you. Amen.